I work for O'Reilly Media. I'm actually managing editor of the online publishing group. So we look for things that are interesting in technology, news, trends, things that come out, and try to push those, promote those, find out what our readers are going to be interested in now and in the next few years. I also have a background in software development. I left the lucrative world of software development to be a writer and editor, and I enjoy that, but I also have a foot in the software development world, especially in free software. I'm very interested in making sure that computing is always going to be free and accessible to people regardless of education, income level, anything like that. So I want to make sure the future is open for everybody. I've been with O'Reilly just about 6 years now.
Well, I'm currently a software consultant. I work as an independent consultant, working with teams that are interested in improving their capability in some way. I talk about focusing on operational excellence, practical excellence in software teams. I started out as a programmer in 1994 and worked in that field for quite a while and became a team lead, got introduced to Agile development, had a lot of success with it, and really had a great time with that as well. So that introduced me to the world of Agile development. Found that was in 2000, and in 2000 there weren't a lot of teams doing Agile development. So what I was finding was that if I wanted to practice Agile development, and it's a little bit, you know, you get sucked in. Once you start doing Agile development, having a lot of success with it, you get to the point where you don't really want to do anything else. So I got started with Agile development, really liked it, found that I couldn't go back, and found that I was spending a lot of time teaching people how to do Agile development so that I could do it myself. So I figured if I was going to spend all my time doing that, I might as well say that that's what I was going to do, and that's when I became an Agile consultant, and I've been doing that ever since. So that's what I do now. In 2006, the Agile Alliance gave me, I guess maybe it was 2005.
I think it was 2005.
Anyway, they awarded me one of the first of the Gordon Pask Awards for Agile Excellence, which is the premier award that the Agile Alliance gives. And then, of course, Shane and I wrote this book a couple of years ago.
That's right.
I started out studying electrical engineering, and I think it was the materials course that killed that ambition. You know, I just couldn't take all the quantum physics. So I actually dropped out of school because I was offered a programming job due to some posts I made on FidoNet, which was sort of like Usenet, which was sort of like, you know, internet forums, only a little more civil. And spent a couple of years in that job before going back to school in computer science and studying computer science.
I would agree in music.
Agree in music.
The day I graduated, I said, I like to eat, and I don't want to be living in a van the rest of my life, so I'm going to go find something else to do. Sure. Agile is more of a top-level concept. You can contrast it with things that aren't Agile, so inflexible, static. The idea is, with Agile, you want to be able to react to things that happen. And maybe not just react, but also plan for change. And so change is probably inevitable in most software projects. What Agile says is, we're not going to try to reduce the risk of change happening, we're going to exploit that. And so if change happens, we're in the position to take advantage of that.
I have another definition which I think appeals to the more cynical people in the world, which is that on one level, Agile development is really a marketing term. It's a brand name. Because back in 2001, a bunch of people who were doing similar things that at the time were called lightweight methodologies got together and said, we're tired of being called lightweights. We don't want to be called lightweights anymore, so we're going to get together and say, what is it that we're doing that's not like RUP, that's not like waterfall, that's not a heavyweight methodology? What is it? So they got together at a ski resort in Utah at Snowbird and came up with this name, Agile. So in a way, it's a brand name, it's a marketing term. And fortunately, it's not just a brand name, and there's nobody making, you know, getting rich off of selling the word Agile. The Agile Alliance is the closest thing we have, and they're a nonprofit organization. And because there's something real behind this, because what these people were doing did have some real meat behind it, it's also what Shane was talking about.
Right.
It's an approach to software development that focuses on flexibility and feedback and simplicity and not doing too much. And it's got some of those lightweight concepts in there too. And what it looks like in practice is generally small teams working closely together in close communication with their customers, producing software every couple of weeks. Well, it's not essential that it be small teams, but it's common that it's small teams. And one of the reasons is that in Agile development, we're really focused on collaboration and communication. And there's just this natural barrier of about, some people say 7 people, some people say 12 people. When you have more than a certain number of people, our monkey brains take over and we start fighting with each other rather than cooperating, or that's an exaggeration.
Well, it's like Brooks' Law, for example. Adding more people to a late project makes a project later. That's because the communication overhead between all of those people, you get Cartesian product almost. So if you have 2 people, Jim and I can talk to each other, and that's easy. You add in a third person, you can talk to each other, we can talk to each other, we can talk to each other. And the more people you add, the more lines of communication you have, and it gets more difficult. Not just to have a conversation, but to spread information throughout the team.
But we're using the word team in a very specific way. A lot of people use the word team to mean a group of people working on something similar or related. And they talk about having teams of 500 people. But it's just not possible to have teamwork with a team of 500 people where you're actually all collaborating and are interdependently working together to achieve a common goal. You're not a team if you don't have to work with the other person every day in order to accomplish your goal. You're maybe a group. So there are a lot of teams out there that are actually groups of 1 or 2 person teams. So for example, I was up at Microsoft and they were telling us about the work they had done to put out C#. This was a while ago. And I said, oh, well, how big is your compiler team? And they said 4 people. And that kind of shocked me because, you know, it's Microsoft. I expected it to be a huge organization. And they had hundreds and hundreds of people on that project. And the actual team sizes were still pretty small. All those teams were working together to make one product suite. They had a Visual Studio suite of teams, they had the C# language team, they had the framework team, they had the .NET team. These people were all working together, but the individual teams were still fairly small. And that's why you'll hear Agile teams talk about small teams, because that's just what we can have people productively do when we're talking about working together.
And a very tight focus on the product the team produces as well.
Yeah, and because we need to make larger products, there are things such as, you may hear the term Scrum of Scrums, where we'll group multiple of these teams together in order to produce something bigger than just what 6 to 8 to 12 people can do together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In fact, that's something that we feel is critical, is that you have a cross-functional team. We want, in Agile development, we're really focused on producing value quickly and effectively. And so we want everybody on the team, everybody who's necessary in order to produce the product. So generally speaking, unless you're working on something that you conceived and are going to deliver and sell yourself, you're going to need more than programmers. And you're going to need more than testers. You're going to need product experts. You're going to perhaps need interaction designers. You're going to need domain experts. You need a lot of people to come together to produce this result. And we want them to all work together so they can do that quickly without having to wait for each other or have poor communication or misunderstandings. We said, let's start with the number of programmers that you have, because that's generally your most constrained resource.
You can't go faster than the number of programmers you have, generally speaking.
Right. Although sometimes the testers are the constraint and sometimes your product experts are the constraint. So this is all...
just a rough rule of thumb.
A rough rule of thumb, exactly. So we said, let's say you have 6 programmers. Then for every 3 programmers, you're going to need 2 domain experts or product people. And that depends on how complicated your problem domain is. But let's say 2 customers for every 3 programmers, then we had 1 tester for every 4 to 6 programmers. So if 6 programmers, that'd give you 4 customers and a tester, and maybe a project manager, maybe not, maybe that's one of the customers. That'd give you 10 or 11 people. Agile's the category.
Yes.
And extreme programming is one of the methods that falls into that category. So we have extreme programming, we have Scrum, we have Crystal, which is also a family of methods. We have DSDM, we have adaptive software development. You know, we have all these different methods that all the people that came together at Snowboard came to talk about. They each brought their own method and created this family of methods called Agile.
We wanted to have a single thing we could point to and say, whatever you choose is fine, but if we really want you to master agility, we're going to teach you the best way we know. We're going to pick one method we know works very well in practice for these types of environments you're likely to find yourself in. We're going to give you all the details on that. After you're done practicing that for a while, let's take a step back and talk about why the pieces fit together, why it works the way it does. And then we'll say, okay, now there's some deeper principles behind that all of the Agile methods and approaches share. These are what they are. Now that you've experienced how it works, maybe you've customized a little bit for your team, let's talk about what you've been doing. We think it's the Shuhari approach, where you first learn by doing, and then you learn by analyzing, then you learn by philosophizing. That's probably not a great explanation of Shuhari.
It's close enough.
But you think about that, going from very specific practices that you do because someone has said, do this, to understanding those practices and then understanding why those practices even exist. We thought XP was a great way to talk about that.
Yeah, so we wanted to give our readers something concrete. And so we had to pick a method. We could have, cherry-picked from a bunch of different methods, but we wanted to pick something that we had actually experienced working in practice. And we wanted to pick something that had a lot of meat to it. And extreme programming, in addition to having a bunch of the structural and planning-based practices like some of the other Agile methods, is kind of unique in that it has a lot of focus on engineering and technical practices as well. So it pretty much covered everything we needed, and we both had a lot of experience with it.
Right.
So it was something that we could provide a lot of concrete advice about.
There's a section toward the end of chapter 3, I believe it is. Jim made a wonderful chart that compares XP to Scrum and a couple of other practices. And Scrum is great. It's mostly focused on organizational practices, though. Not a lot of technical practices there, which is fine. That's not its goal. We thought that if you're going to have organizational success, you need both. And so XP gave us both. It has organizational practices, how you structure meetings, how you work with customers, business concerns. Also, if you're a programmer, how you work with other programmers, how you work with the code. And so it was everything all in one place. We thought it was very, very effective.
Yeah. That is a real can of worms, because people fight about whether or not software development is an engineering discipline, a craft discipline, an art, a scientific discipline. So I'm going to say I don't know, and it's Shane's fault.
I think software development is mostly a craft, but making a chair is a craft. And I can make, well, I probably can't, but if I could make a chair, I could make a chair that's recognizable as a chair. You have the Platonic ideal of a chair in your mind, and you look at that and say, okay, 4 legs and a back and something to sit on, that's probably a chair. Where's the artistry in that? You can go, I went to a Mexican restaurant a couple of weeks ago, went out with a friend, and they had these just brilliant colors painted on the chairs. And it's a chair. I could look at a black chair like this and say, okay, it's a chair. That chair had artistry in it. So there's an element of artistry in a craft as well. When you're doing it well, you're adding things that may not be specifically necessary just to get the job done, but you know that a real artist put some work into that. Even though it is still a functional thing, there is a level of artistry in that you don't necessarily have if it's just a craft. I think software is a lot like that. As for the title, you have alliteration in there. That's really nice. Honestly. You have the art of computer programming, not as much alliteration, but nobody questions Knuth on that. Yeah. Why can't we put alliteration in there and say it's a good book anyway?
Yeah, so chairs and Mexican restaurants aside,
yes.
The reason I like the title, The Art of Agile Development, is because generally books that have that sort of title are talking about the nuts and bolts, here's somebody's real world experience and practical tips and tricks that they've figured out from really doing it. And that's what we wanted to put into this book, and I think that's what we succeeded in putting into this book.
Exactly. We don't want to teach people just how to do something. We want to teach them how to think about what they're doing, and also to figure out why they're doing it. And it's a real path to mastery.
Yeah, and also gain the benefit of our hard-won experience. We have a lot of little sidebars and tips in there saying, hey, when this happens, you're going to see this sort of result. And
here's how we failed.
Yeah, here's how we
pulled
failed.
It out of the fire.
And maybe you can avoid this failure, or at least recognize it when it's coming.
Or make a different kind of failure.
Yeah, yeah. I would say we're phenomenally successful in everything we do.
I'd say I'm phenomenally successful at failing a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But
well,
you want to have a great ambition, right? If you're failing at small things, that's not very interesting. If you're failing at big things, it means you're at least trying big things.
So to answer the question seriously, I think that our experiences are pretty typical. Now, I can't speak for everybody, but you know, software development is a team effort. And I've met people who've worked with, you know, all-star teams and, you know, composed entirely of high-strung superstars. But my experiences with Agile development and with XP were not on those sorts of teams. They were, you know, normal teams consisting of a normal range of people, some good, some not so good, some friendly, some grouchy. I fall into the grouchy category. And, you know, big teams, small teams, all sorts of teams. And we didn't start out as experts in Agile development. In fact, when I did my first Agile project, it was one of the first leadership experiences I had in software development. And I made a lot of mistakes, going back to the theme of failure. It was through that experience that we became experts. And actually, that is one of the themes of our book, is that if you want to become an expert, you need to have experience. You don't need to be an expert to start. You need to be an expert when you finish, or as you go. And going through this will allow you to become an expert. There are some things that make Agile development easier and some things that make it harder. And I don't think you could say that there's any one thing that you can do that will guarantee success in any project. There are probably some things that you can do that will guarantee failure.
Well, for example, an easy way to fail is if not everybody buys into the project.
Yeah.
From management to programmers to business people. If you don't have at least a willingness to try, you're going to have a very difficult time succeeding. Now, some people you may convince with some degree of success. Success breeds trust, but if you don't have people's minds open and willing to give it a legitimate, honest try, you're going to have a very difficult time succeeding.
Some companies have big, thick binders full of the process, and that process has a capital P on it, of what you must do in order to do projects at this company. And that doesn't actually work that well, but they have faith that it works well. Agile development doesn't even try to pretend that will work well. If you're going to do Agile development, you need to be willing to give it an honest try. And everybody on the team has to be willing to give it an honest try. Even if they don't think it's going to work, they have to be willing to try it. So if somebody on the team says, that's not going to work for us, I absolutely refuse to try it, and you're a big bozo for even suggesting it, yeah, maybe that person shouldn't be on the team, or maybe you shouldn't try it. Other things that will make it easier, and we have these sorts of things in the book. There's a bunch of different situations in which you can apply Agile development. You can apply Agile development with a distributed team, for example, but we don't cover that in the book. And it's easier to learn Agile development for the first time if everybody's sitting together in the same room. What would some others be?
Easy access to your customer, someone with business concerns. If I have a question about this feature I'm implementing, is it easier for me to turn around and say, hey Jim, what happens when account balance goes down below 0? If it's so easy for me to do that, I don't even have to guess at what should happen. We can avoid that kind of failure condition, that kind of bug altogether. So easy access to a customer, someone with really strong business domain knowledge, is a very, very good indicator of the possibility to succeed.
Yeah, that's the cross-functional nature of the team. Now, if you don't have that, again, you can succeed, but what you're doing is you're introducing the potential for errors and delays. So you're not going to see some of the really great results that you could see otherwise.
It's just making it a little more difficult for you.
Yeah, but you're not going to be any worse off than you were before, because presumably that's the type of environment most teams typically have.
Exactly. It's an existing risk in your team.
Yeah. So one thing that I think you really do need to have, though, is there needs to be at least one person on the team who's got a mindful approach to their work. Meaning that there's somebody on the team who thinks about what they do and why they do it and why it's working and why it's not. Constantly reflecting. This doesn't need to be the same person all the time, because nobody's this good all the time. But you need to take a thoughtful approach to your work. And actually, I think that's what distinguishes a senior programmer from a junior programmer. It's not the number of years they work, it's the thoughtful or not thoughtful approach they take to their work.
It's the 4-year-old approach to software development. 4-year-old, 3-year-old, 2-year-old. The big question is why? Now, you hope you're smarter than a 4-year-old, or at least have a longer attention span than a 4-year-old. Like, why is the sky blue? Okay, why are there pancakes? Okay, you want to say, why did we fail at this? Because people weren't running tests. Why weren't people running tests? Because they take too long. Why do tests take too long? Because you want to narrow in with your why questions, but you want to have that mindset that you're very, very curious and you're not going to stop until you get a good answer.
Yeah, and it's not just about failure. It's why did this work, or
exactly.
what's working, or when is it working, and
yes.
Will it work if we do it this way? Let's run an experiment. Let's find out. Well, that's a really interesting question because, and it's one that I've been learning about continuously. There's a lot of teams out there that aren't co-located, and for some reason or another. Maybe they're in different countries, maybe they're open source teams where there's, they're not all working for the same company and they're not all located in the same area. What I say is that don't go with a distributed team just because you think it's easier. A distributed team is harder. And often people take the distributed team as the easy way out. Oh, well, we want this person, he's over there. We want this person, he's over here. We'll just sort of smush everybody together. It's a process of thinking of people as sort of components in a machine. These, cog-shaped interchangeable programmer pieces. That's not going to work for you. You have to be aware that people are human and they have issues that arise in human scenarios, like personality conflicts and disputes and getting along better with some people than others. A lot of that stuff is easier when you're co-located because people who sit together and work together gain respect for each other. Communication's easier when you're co-located because you don't have lots of delays.
That's right.
So co-location is something that is valuable and helpful, but it's not absolutely required. But if you're not going to do it, you should recognize that there's a cost you're paying for.
Let's take it from the aspect of two areas. Jim and I are writing this book, for example. We both live in the Portland area, but we didn't get together every day to work on this. Towards the end, when we were working it very, very strong, we were on the phone for half an hour, 4 or 5 days a week. Sometimes I'd go over to his house, we'd work on it together. Sometimes he'd come over to my house, we'd work on it together. Even though there's nothing endemic to the writing process that requires two people to be sitting in front of one keyboard and one monitor at any time, just getting together and laying down some index cards on the table and planning things out in person, even though we could easily have done this over the phone, being able to do that together was very instrumental in getting this done. Another thing Jim mentioned in the context of software is open source free software projects, where it doesn't really matter what time zone I'm in, it doesn't matter if I'm on the road traveling, I'm connecting to the internet from my hotel with my laptop, I can still get work done. I can collaborate with people and we can build great systems, big systems, systems that power the internet that way. We still need the ability to get together in person. We can have a hackathon one weekend, all sit together in a room, bring in pizza and beer, and get twice as much done, improve our energy level of productivity by measurable percentages. There's something about being together in person, just being able to turn around and say, oh, by the way, let me grab you a beer and let me ask you a question about something I cared about I just never think about when we're talking via email or on IRC.
Well, Agile, the concepts of Agile apply to any domain, but the practices of Agile are very specific to software development. So some of the practices of Agile development we didn't use, and I don't think they would apply.
Right.
But a lot of the concepts we did use, we really focused on feedback. We posted everything that we did to our mailing list, and actually on my website.
Yes.
For public review. We got a ton of feedback on it. Over 1,000 messages were
yes.
posted to the mailing list, and that was invaluable. Some of the best sections started out terribly, and got flamed up and down across the internet.
I loved that section. I really did.
One of the sections was is called No Bugs. It used to be called No Bug Database, and it made it to Joel and Software's forums. And of course, Joel sells a bug database. So that people were
You were saying, have you ever written software? Have you ever even used software
Yeah,
before?
what are you, complete idiots? Obviously.
Have you seen a computer?
Yeah. So we used that to improve what we were trying to say, and actually made a much stronger section as a result.
Exactly. We didn't anticipate. We wrote the section. We thought it was great. Mm-hmm. We each liked it. We signed off on it. We sent it out for public review, and the feedback came back. What are you guys on? Are you crazy?
Yeah.
I mean, instantaneously. Getting that feedback there let us say, okay, well, if everybody hates this besides us, it's time to knife the baby.
Yeah.
Actually, let's kill your darling. Let's edit that part out. It's time to edit that section mm-hmm. and do something very, very different. If we can't communicate a point effectively, we failed as writers. It's much, much nicer to realize that a day or two after you've written it than months after the book has come out and everybody's looking at that in the review and saying, these guys don't know what they're talking about.
So we did throw away that section, we rewrote it, and we kept the basic concept of, when is it appropriate to have a bug database in a much more nuanced fashion that is actually now one of my favorite sections of the book. And another thing that we did is we really focused on keeping things integrated.
Yes.
We wanted to have, so one of the ideas in Agile development is don't fool yourself. Don't make yourself feel like you're further along than you actually are. Get things all the way done before you move on to the next thing. And that's something that we did quite a bit, is we really tried to get things all the way done. Now the nature of publishing is that there were some things that we could not do in advance, such as copy editing and the index. But as much as possible, we tried to get sections all the way done, published out onto the internet, get reviews, get it edited, and then move on to the next thing, so we could tell how long it would take to get the book done. So I don't think there's any project that isn't a good fit as long as the people on the team agree that they want to try Agile development. That said, if you've never done Agile development before, it's probably a good idea to start with either hire somebody who's been in your situation or start with something that's easier. And those things include, well, don't try to do distributed teams right away. Try to have your first Agile project be a team that sits together and is cross-functional. Try to have your first Agile project be a project that's a greenfield system where you're building code from scratch, because there's a lot of Agile engineering practices that are a lot more fun if you're not working with a legacy system. Make sure you have management support. Make sure that your language is easy to refactor. What are some of the other ones I'm missing?
It also helps if you're able to get feedback from real customers rapidly. Mm-hmm. If you're doing product development on a product that you may not be able to release to the public in the commercial software, proprietary software development cycle, if you can't actually get that to your customers for 18 months, whether it's tied to a hardware platform or you don't know if anybody even wants it, you're going to have a really difficult time getting feedback from actual customers. There are ways to work around that, but there's very little substitute from getting actual feedback from the people you want using your software.
Ultimately, I think what determines whether or not Agile is a fit for a project is more about the attitude of the people on the project than the technology you're using. Now, some technologies are easier than others. C is harder to refactor than Java or C# is. Dynamic languages are easier than static languages like Java and C#. So, and then there's tool support. So, those are fairly minor technical details, though. Really, when I see teams succeed or fail at Agile development, it comes down to, are they giving it a real effort and are they getting the support they need from their company? Well, the word was contraindication. Yeah, so if you go to the store and you buy, if you go to the pharmacist and you get some medicine, it's going to have a little insert that's going to say indications and contraindications, which says this is when you should use this medicine and this is when you shouldn't use the medicine. So for each of the practices we discussed, we talk about, this is when you should use it, this is how it works, and at the end we say, and this is when you shouldn't use it. And I think the implication there is that there's no such thing as a silver bullet. There's no one right way and nothing works for everybody. And I think it's really important to recognize that. You won't find the term best practice anywhere in our book, because there's no such thing as best practices that are actually best for all situations. What you have is pretty good practices that we've seen to work in some circumstances, and here's what those circumstances are.
That reminds me of something in the book. What was it that we wrote? That's right, this is what it was. If you can solve a customer's problem without writing software, don't write the software. The ultimate contraindication.
Yeah. If you can get the benefits of pair programming without pair programming, and that's actually cheaper and easier and more effective than pair programming, don't pair program.
And you can measure it.
Well, or you have some sense of it.
Exactly.
Try it, run an experiment. Then don't pair program. If you can do it without coding, don't code.
Exactly.
Now, I don't know if there's that many situations where you can do it without coding.
Or pair programming.
Or pair programming, but there are some. And one of the situations where you don't want to pair program, for example, is when A, nobody wants to try it because it's sort of a sensitive, controversial idea, or B, when people aren't located in the same room and can't actually sit together to pair program.
And really can't sit together and pair program.
Yeah, and then, are you going to try tools or are you going to do something else? So we say, here's where this isn't going to work, and here's what you can do instead.
Because the important part is not doing the practice for the practice. The important part is getting the benefits of the practice. If you can get those in another way, then if you really can't do the practice, which we recommend, but if you really honestly can't do it, you've given it an honest try and it doesn't work, you still probably need those benefits from somewhere, and here are some options for that.
Yeah, and ultimately what we're trying to achieve here is successful software. We want to have software that's going to lead to a success, and there's a bunch of different aspects to that. There's organizational success, where you're making money or saving money or projecting a brand image or saving the world or whirling some peas. Whatever you're doing, you want to have some organizational success. You also need to have a technical success, because you don't want to be in the situation that a lot of startups I work with are in, which is that they had this initial success, they got funding, so they had an organizational success, and now their software is dying out from underneath them, and they have to rewrite it at great expense, and they're falling behind. So you have to have technical success, so you're not rewriting. And you need to have personal success. You need to have the people who are using the product getting value out of it, and you need to have the people who are working on the product getting value out of it, because if that's not happening, they're either going to stop working on it or they're going to stop using it. And you don't want that either. So you need organizational, technical, and personal success. How you get there, we don't care, except that we have some ideas about how you might get there, and that's what we talk about.
And we'll give you the best advice we have.
Yeah. I love those exercises.
I like those etudes. That was great.
Yeah. And they weren't our idea. That actually came from our editor, Mary O'Brien. Got one of our early drafts because we were trying to, get lots of feedback. And she said, you guys need some exercises. Put some questions in the book or something like that. And
we thought about that for a while.
And said, no, we don't want to do that. So we did something else instead, and that's where the etudes come in. And
turns out she was right, though.
No, I mean, we wanted to do something. We just didn't want to do question and answer.
Right.
So, do you want to talk about the etudes?
I think you're probably better off talking about them.
Okay.
You were the one, as I recall, who came up with the real germ of the idea.
Yeah, well, it's something that I use in my consulting practice. I work with teams, and they're learning complicated, difficult techniques like incremental design. And that requires that they really integrate a lot of information, understanding designs, reflecting on those designs, communicating well about those designs, just to take design as an example. So I had heard this term etude come from Kent Beck, and I didn't really know what he meant by that, but I made up my own definition, which was taking the word etude from the musical world, where you're repeating, and Shane would definitely know about this since he has a musical background, but you're repeating a piece of music solely to get a technical benefit out of it. And sometimes that piece of music has real musical value, and sometimes it's just scales.
Well, Chopin's etudes, for example, real musical beauty in those, but effectively they're scales and arpeggios, which every pianist, every guitarist, everybody who does music with fingering needs to do, but there can be artistry in them. Otherwise, you're doing it to get finger strength, dexterity, improve your octave range, breath patterns.
Yeah.
It's just something you do to be able to better at doing your artistry or your craft.
So the essence is a exercise that you repeat over and over every day for a certain amount of time in order to master a technical skill. And I use these every day for half an hour with my consulting work. And I found them really effective, and they worked really well. And when Mary came to us and said, we need some exercises, I said, hey, let's try this etude idea. And so what we did was we sort of distilled this idea down into paper form and said, here's an exercise that you should do every day for a week or two as a team. And we actually created the exercises together, and we ran them at a local team here in Portland that does XP, had them do them for us and sort of troubleshooted them and refined them that way. So I think they're really neat.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard a lot of people tell me what they thought of them. I had one person email me and say, hey, we're trying your etudes.
Wow.
And I said, great, tell me how it works out. Never heard anything back. Shane's sense of humor is terrible. It's terrible.
Jim wishes he could be funny. If you were to ask us, what do you think is the most important feature of XP or Agile, we disagree on that. I'm not sure any given day what either of us would say, but it would vary, and it varies. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It probably has more to do with mood and how much sleep each of us has had than anything else in particular. I think was this project worth doing? Now, that moves the question off to, what do you think makes it worth doing? But if I'm writing a project to learn more about this particular library, this concurrency model, this language, and I've done that, it's a success. For me, yeah. I'm the only one who can define that success. If I write a project for my employer and say we need to be able to manage our editorial calendar, and the editors can look at that and see here's what we're planning, and the editors actually can't do that, the project is not a success. Code may be beautiful, it may have wonderful tests, I may have written it to deadline, to budget, whatever, but if they can't use it, that's a problem. Or, honestly, if it takes me a year to write it and it makes my editors 10 times more productive, even though I promised it in a month, you know, after a year of doing that, the productivity is going to benefit. People are not going to remember it took me too long to do it. They're going to say, okay, so he didn't meet his budget goal, he didn't meet his deadline goal, but it's a success. People love it, it's working, it's making them more productive.
I want to be careful about that, though, because I think
there's a nuance.
Making and meeting commitments is supremely important. Because if you can't make and meet commitments, people lose trust in you. They lose faith in your ability. And so there's a basic professionalism aspect here that's at stake. So on the one hand, we don't spend a lot of time on measures of success in the book, but this is something I care a lot about because this is what I found my business on, is helping teams achieve successful software development. And so I define success in 3 ways, and I touched on it earlier: organizational success, technical success, and personal success. And in the book we have a practice called vision, which is really about organizational success. And that's not something, as Shane was implying, that's something that every project is going to have to define for itself. What is it that this project does that leads to success? And figuring out the answer to that is a really important thing to do, because what you'll discover is that as you're talking to all the myriad people who are involved in this project, everybody's got a different perspective on it. Sometimes it's slightly different perspectives, and sometimes it's, oh my God, you know, I can't believe you think that that's success and that you think that's success.
Exactly.
So it's really important to get together on the same page. Otherwise, you're going to deliver something and discover that you didn't know why you were doing this. So that's organizational success. Again, technical success. If the project has to be rewritten after 3 years, that's not a success.
Well, it may be that its lifespan is only 3 years.
Okay, that could be.
You're migrating to a new platform or something. That may not necessarily be a failure.
That's true. And I think most companies aren't setting out to throw $1 million investment away after 3 years.
No. Most of the time, that is a sign of failure.
Yeah. So I want to see the software's maintenance costs not get drastically more expensive over time, and actually
cheaper.
I think it can and should get cheaper over time. And this is sort of difficult for people to accept, but the Agile engineering practices give you the tools to do that. And then you have to have personal success. I don't want to see a lot of turnover as a result of this project. I don't want to see people quitting. And I want your users of your project to support the development of the project. Your stakeholders need to support it, because if they don't, particularly the more influential stakeholders, even if this is an organizational success and makes money, they could sabotage the work. So you need them to at least be neutral and preferably supporting the work. So these things all come together, and personal success and technical success are easier to understand, and organizational success you need to define as part of why you're doing the project.
So you almost take it.
And I think, by the way, we talked about the importance of deadlines. I think making and meeting commitments ties into personal success in a lot of ways, because it helps people see what you're doing and that it's going to work. And it ties into organizational success because you have to coordinate with marketing departments, sales, perhaps other projects and other initiatives. So it's not that these things are not important.
Right.
But making and meeting commitments on its own is not success.
And I don't mean to imply that it's okay to blow off deadlines, but if you're honest about what's going on and you learn more about the software as you're going on, and you're honest about communicating your state, your status, and revising your plan as you go on, I think that is very, very important.
Yeah, it is nuanced, because sometimes people take the attitude that success is to budget, to scope, as planned. And the fact is that as you're working on the project, you're going to learn new things, and you'll probably learn better ways that might warrant pushing the scope out a little bit. And that's what we did with the book.
Exactly.
We discovered new things about how we wanted to develop the book as we were doing it, and we made a conscious decision to push the date out rather than cut scope that we wanted.